Good afternoon. Welcome back to another episode. We are talking today again about temptations in the early part of the spiritual life, post getting past mortal sin. Not that you'll never commit a mortal sin again, but you've gone past habitual mortal sin. You've conquered some of those passions. So still talking about those. Nothing really going on in the world that needs noting, I think, so we'll just get right into it. Hope you guys are well. This next one is called Misplaced Priorities, and it's kinda the phrase isn't really important, I don't even think it has a lot to do. I mean, it makes sense why they call it that, but this is probably more commonly understood temptation in the earliest parts of the spiritual life. So this one's gonna involve so it's kinda weird because it's the opposite kind of yesterday. Yesterday we're talking about how you're starting to you might pray too much or fast too much, which really doesn't sound like a problem, but it can be a problem. But today, misplaced priorities refers to the opposite side of that spectrum. And this is the temptation where you are entering the spiritual life and you start looking back on your sinful past, or if you did not have a very sinful past, which I think is true. Everyone's got sins, but sometimes it's crazy, sometimes it's not. But you start looking back, or maybe even like looking at what the world offers, and you're tempted to be like, "Oh wow, that sounds really good. That sounds really tasty. That sounds really nice. I'd like some of that." So that's the temptation. Pretty straightforward. There's a portion of it though I think is more complicated, but we'll talk about that. So you've just conquered mortal sin, and then the obvious thing for the devil to do is gonna be like, remember when you were doing all that fun, sinful stuff before? Why don't you come on back to that? Why don't you come back over here? And when you especially if you have mortified yourself a lot, you can be under the temptation to think those things are very attractive. You're like, "Oh, it is so painful to live the virtuous life. It is so painful to be without these vices that sometimes involved honor, physical pleasure, power, different things like that. Control is a big temptation, even though people don't like to talk about that. The ability to control a situation. This has to do with money and position. So you're looking back on those things and you're thinking, and you're kind of solidly already in the spiritual life at this point. So you're looking back on it not as if you're going, and you might go back to it. That's true. But this temptation we're more talking about is kind of the image of the spiritual life is just so rigid and arduous that you don't even want to continue, and looking back on things as if they were sweet, and just kind of like this attitude like, "Oh, I would love to go back to that, but I love you, God, but oh, those things were really nice. I'd love to go back." Kind of like that attitude. And in a sense this could lead you to go back to your old life, but also in the sense that I want to more talk about today, it will grind your spiritual life to a halt, because it will become very painful for you if you don't address this temptation. Because then every time you pray, you're like, "Oh, I remember when I could just sleep in." Or whenever you're not going to a party or you're not going to a social event, you're like, "Oh, that would have been so fun. That would have been so great." And then it makes it harder for you to pray, to think about the eternal things. So I think that point is pretty straightforward. I think this is a common temptation, not as controversial a temptation. I think it's got to be most people that experience this, and even for people that cradle Catholic, lived in a good family, you could you might see this temptation another way, where maybe you watch a movie or you read a book and you're hearing about all the fun, you know, scare quotes, fun things that people are doing, these non-religious people are doing, and you're like, "Oh, that sounds so cool. That would be so amazing." And you're tempted in that way. But then there's another part of this temptation that Saint Bernard of Clairvaux again and Saint Teresa of Avila talk about, which is this has more to do with the priorities. Is this temptation wants to lead you into not continuing to kind of focus or hone your life more towards the Lord. So this is going to kind of seem contrary to the yesterday's temptation. But when we're in the early part of the spiritual life, we can think that we've done enough. Especially when you get past mortal sin, you're like, "Ooh, I'm good, and it's done, and it's over. I'm in it." And this temptation makes you think it's like, "Well, I got rid of that stuff, and I'm not having fun," which the life of virtue is fun, but you might be tempted to be like, "Oh, I'm not having fun, so like I've done everything the Lord desires of me." But specifically, Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint Bernard of Clairvaux talk about is like, no, you need to continue refining your life, and specifically, they're always talking about avoiding occasions of sin. And so in the sense of this temptation, it's they want you to try to cut out everything that is unnecessary to your life, to your state of life, to your commitment to God. And so more for lay people, this is going to look like, we have to participate in business and we have to participate in the money market, free market, stuff like that. But they're talking about you could really hone that part of your life where you're only dealing with the necessities. And this, I think, will necessarily pitch you against other people because worldly people are not going to understand this. So you have to be willing to kind of ruffle some feathers a little bit, but you have to kind of take a stock of your life and be like, all right, what parts, what interactions with this part of my life or the world, the business world, are necessary to provide for myself, my family, to fulfill my duties, and what parts of them are not really necessary and I can really cut them out. So that's going to be difficult. And we can become addicted to, being successful, making money. So that would be especially hard if you were addicted to that, which I think all of us are to an extent. Maybe addiction is not the right word, but we enjoy that. So that's an example. And then an example I like to go to is more on the personal side, not really the business, but it has to do with your money still. But what activities and hobbies are unnecessary? We should still have recreation and enjoy ourselves to an extent and have leisure, which leisure is really misunderstood. Maybe we'll talk about it after this. But, I watched, so for example, I watched this, I think it was a YouTube video. I can't remember. It was some sort of video, but this guy was showing his life as an electrical engineer. And I'm imagining this guy is not religious, but it was like this regular 26-year-old, whatever that means nowadays, electrical engineer. So he'd go to work, 8 to 10 hours of the day. So he showed himself in his cubicle working 8 to 10 hours, and then not the whole 8 to 10 hours, just like a brief moment of it. But then afterwards, after he goes to his home where his wife and his dogs are, kind of funny, and they have a dinner or a lunch. I'm not even sure. So he does that with his wife and his dogs, and then after that, he goes to the gym and works out. And then after the gym, he goes back to his home, and I think he eats another meal, which is kind of weird. And then he's with his wife eating and his dogs. And then he goes back to the same gym, a different gym, and he plays basketball. And then he goes back home and it's basically like sleep time. And that would be an example. Like, I'm gonna use that as an example. I don't think this person was religious, but if your whole life is like work and then two recreational activities and eating, especially if you have a family, but even if you didn't have a family, that's gonna be a little bit disordered, and we need to think about that. Not that there's anything wrong with basketball or sports, not that there's anything wrong essentially with working out, but if you've got a significant part of your day dedicated to those things and you're trying to grow in the spiritual life, that's not gonna work out. So for that guy specifically, I'd be like, maybe pick one or just do it less because that's really consuming your life. So that's another example. More personal examples that I like to get on people for is watching television, streaming services, all that jazz. I guess you too, if you're watching this, don't watch too much of me or whatever you watch. I think these can be huge hindrances. Obviously, they're not bad in themselves, but we do need to watch that, and we need to basically trim all the fat, get everything unnecessary out of our lives, so we can focus on the life of virtue, prayer, being more involved in those spiritual and corporal works of mercy, which no one seems to think about anymore, but are very important. It seems more now in our society, it's more important the spiritual works of mercy because it's just the opportunities for the corporal works of mercy are less frequent, which in one sense praise God, but in another sense it's because we have kind of a society that divides the poor from the rich a lot, kind of separates them. You don't really see each other a lot. Kind of a side tangent. What do you think about all those things? So, I mean, for me, I'm always telling my friends like cut out all of the streaming services, and then if it's like they can't say, all right, just have one streaming service. Do you really need more than one? I feel like no Christian, and this is just my opinion, but I don't think any Christian can justify more than one streaming service. So that's a good one. And there's so many different things. So that's misplaced priorities. Hopefully that was a helpful. It's a lot shorter. It's not as complicated. It's just like you need to keep growing, and how you keep growing is cutting out those non-essentials of your life. And this is going to include friendships and stuff too, maybe depending on who you are. There's a lot of different ways. Music, music that's not going to help you be holy. It goes to everything, all the things. So that's that. And then I think a general concept off of this is the idea of the simple life that is very biblical, and a lot of the saints will talk about it, which I think a lot of people nowadays do not enjoy talking about, is that honestly, even for people that aren't religious or don't care about the things of God, it is hard to do a lot of things in a day. I think I see a lot of people, they're like rushing, even myself sometimes. I'm just like, I got to get all these things done. And it's like, bro, you're going to die. You're going to die someday. It could be tomorrow. Why don't we just work on a couple of things and do those things well? We don't have to be everywhere all at once, all the time, doing all of the things. So, but for the Christian, I think this is especially pertinent, especially important, is to simplify our lives, is to find a couple of things that are very important to us and just to focus on those things. Understand how small you are. Also, while understanding how important it is, you are infinitely important to God. God loves you, but the world doesn't love you. So you're going to do all these things for the world, whether, for your own fame, fortune, honor, things that the world, in a split second will just throw you to the side for the next thing, will impoverish you, will hurt you. Your health is limited, your money is limited, your power is limited. So just picking a couple of things and really simplifying your life. And this simplification will actually give you more time for leisure, which leisure is resting in God, resting in God's creation, contemplating the higher things. So honestly, if you can really get into this aspect of the spiritual life, simplifying your life, life becomes very beautiful, becomes very enjoyable. You can watch as the world, like I literally sometimes I'll see people rushing by me, and I kind of pity them. I'm like, they're just running, running, running for what? For something that's going to end. They're so stressed out. They're, they're agonizing over these different deadlines, these different things they have to get done. And it's like, maybe just understand right now that your goals are probably not going to end up like you think they are, or they're not going to get finished. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you don't strive for them, but it means you're not as tense. You're not as upset and unhappy about it, because your real goal is eternal. And that comes with that biblical view from, if you remember, from St. John of the Cross, St. Therese of Lisieux, is like, yeah, we need to work hard in this life. We need to do the good that we can, the good that's placed in front of us. But also remembering, like, it's all going to end. We are going to die. It didn't matter that you watched that extra season of Friends in one day instead of over. I mean, don't even watch Friends at all, but hopefully you get my point there. But yeah, simplify it. That would be awesome. Like when I started doing this podcast thing, it was like there's a couple other things I was doing, and I was like, would I rather just talk to myself on this camera, or would I rather do those other things? I was like, I'll cut a couple things out so I can do this, and it doesn't have to be stressed and time cramped and everything like that. So I chose this. I chose this life, this camera life, this camera life. But hopefully that's helpful. Really be thinking about it because I can't answer all the questions for you, nor can the saints really. They can assist you with this. They assisted me with this, but it's going to apply to your own life. So take these principles and apply them to your own life. We're going to keep going with this because I just really think they're helpful, and I want everyone to know about them. I think that's it for today. Kind of a chill Wednesday. So hopefully you enjoyed it. We got one more day tomorrow this week. We'll see what happens. There was I don't know if I should. There was a funny Michael Knowles thing. You guys know I don't. You guys know I love Michael Knowles. No, I do not. I mean, I do love him. I don't like his takes, but today he made a snarky comment about if you guys did we talk about this, the Thomas Massey. So Thomas Massey had, I think the Israel lobby put up 20 plus million, possibly 30 plus million against him, and he lost his primary. And then another guy lost his primary, I think in Texas. And Michael Knowles is, he's, I don't know what he is. He's some sort of agent or something, Ben Shapiro agent. But he says, oh, this guy lost. So we have to measure this, right, by like the Israel lobby or something like that. And I was like, I know he's just being like purposely dense, but I was like, he rage baited me. He got me. that was good. You guys could find it. It was a tweet. I didn't really prepare to talk about it, but I was like, dang. I was like, Michael Knowles is an operator, which I guess everyone's kind of an operator for some sort of goal in view. Oh, I wasn't going to talk about Pope Benedict. I'm reading a book by him about Western culture. Some of the stuff that Pope Benedict says, I know he's smarter than me, but something feels off about it a little bit. I haven't exactly been able to place my finger on it, but he's talking about like the history of Europe right now. I think for me, and I'm probably wrong on this, but I think that he thinks that there can be some sort of like bonding or some sort of tranquility between Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, and Jews. And I don't really think there can be. Like the only religion I think that can be tolerant of those other ones is Christianity. And I really think the Catholic Church is the only one that can really be like actually tolerant of other religions. Because I mean, depends because there's so many different slivers of each religion now. But like the OG Muslims, they weren't really sitting around, being like, "We'll tolerate you." Later on, they were in different empires of the Muslims were pretty tolerant compared to the others. And the Jews, yeah, I don't see them being super tolerant. You can see stuff in Israel right now, and obviously there's different types of Judaism to this day, rabbinical Judaism. And obviously Protestants and Catholics, we've been trying to tolerate each other for 400, 500 years. It's not going great. There's just we're fundamentally different. And I personally just think it'd be better if we all just understood that and we're like, "Hey, you can be over there happy and we can be over here happy." Yeah, I know it's controversial, some sort of like religious segregation or something, which is what a lot of the world had. And well, a lot of people nowadays think that's like, oh, segregation is essentially bad. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. I don't think they're right though. But yeah, I think just Pope Benedict has this view that this is possible, this like integration of the faith. Not that like that we would become like a triple one religion faith thing. It's not what he's saying. But I think he's underestimating how much hostility and difference there is between us and overestimating the possibilities for integration. America, like, people give America a lot of grief, but it's kind of impressive how well America has actually handled, like I talked about before, the triple melting pot. And I think this is a lot to do with economic success and like lifestyle um, success, I guess, life or what would you call it? What do they call it? It's like lifestyle something. Where you have a very safe, healthy lifestyle. I can't remember. I was even just talking to someone, and they were mentioning how like the bourgeois economy or society, how it's lifted so many people up in terms of economic position and flourishing. And I'm like, yeah, it's true. That's what I always say. I don't know if I said it on the show, but I always say like liberal capitalism is like the hardest beast to beat because it offers you so many things that people love. Like food, shelter, etc. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off point, but yeah, this book is pretty interesting. Poe Bennett is super smart, obviously. Just something a little it's throwing me a little off, which is okay. And maybe I'm wrong and I need to get my mind right, get my mind aligned with Poe Benedict. But yeah, that's what's going on with me. I mean, is there anything else? I want someone to fight with me, but no one's fighting with me. So if someone fights with me, I can kind of, even in like real life and online, no one's fighting with me. So it's like, we're all just chill then, I guess. Got to say something controversial. Anyway, that's all I got for today. Thanks for being here with me. That's it. Yeah. So please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think about the show, about misplaced priorities. And God bless you. God be with you. I will see you on the next one.